Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Kümin from the Food Global Research Priority at the University of Warwick, and this is a contribution to the feast theme we're running for the Resonate Festival on behalf of Coventry, UK City of Culture 2021. Today, we seek to explore a relationship which is not often seen as close, namely that between bread and feasts. Normally, we see this as an everyday fare that everybody has day in and week out. However, alongside me here in the background, you see a first indication that there could be a connection. This bread is called Zopf or Zöpfe and comes from Switzerland, where traditionally on Sunday mornings, people would have looked forward to having this special bread. It is looking a little bit different. It is plated. It is baked with special ingredients such as milk and butter. It has a lighter, a fluffier, almost sweet taste to it, and it is finished with a golden glow that gives it this appearance of being something very special. Now, however, we need to have a word with an expert about these matters, and I'm delighted to be able to speak with Peter Scholliers, who is Emeritus Professor of the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. He's one of the leading voices in food studies and has published an extensive range of works, particularly on the social and economic aspects of food studies for the modern period. He's also been wrestling with theoretical and conceptual issues. He's been the co-editor of the leading journal Food and History, and like me, he has for several years co-directed the Summer University on Food and Drink Studies at Tours in France. So many thanks, Peter, for taking the time to participate in our little feast. And to start with, maybe, what would you say constitutes a festive bread? And what are the differences with the daily bread, which form the staple food for many people in Europe?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot, Bert, for having me in this webinar. It's a difficult question you're asking. And first, actually have to say that we are talking about bread and not about little breads or viennoiserie. And in some periods, there is very little difference between bread and little breads. You would have a baguette of about 125 grams, but also small crusty breads of about 60 grams. And we're talking about the first category, so we're talking about breads, right? And not about brioche, croissant, and all these smaller sorts of little breads.
Yeah, we got a special little theme on sweets, you know, so I think they might fit into the other category. So yeah, let's exactly focus on the sort of normal bread.
The normal bread, yeah. The common bread on the one hand, and on the other hand, the more festive or the special or the fancy breads. I would like to start this little story at around 1800. This doesn't mean that prior to 1800 there are no festive breads. On the contrary, especially in bigger towns like Paris or London or Vienna, there were a lot of very different sorts of breads. But I started around 1800 when the world started to change radically. With political, economic, social, cultural transformations, all these things we know. But these have affected the production, the consumption, and the meaning of bread, and also of festive breads. So I would classify the bread sorts according to 4 big categories. And each category was consumed by a specific class. Okay, we can discuss about the word class, but you know what I mean, social layers according to income, etc. So the first fine sort of bread was the fine wheat bread that was consumed by the rich. Mind, I'm talking about the early 19th century. Second category was a coarser wheat bread for the middle classes. Third came muslin bread for the lower middle classes, and muslin is a mixture of wheat and rye. And finally, there is the rye bread for the bulk of the people in Europe. That would be the working class and the poor. Now, these are 4 categories of bread, that are common, that are consumed every day by these 4 layers. Now, to answer Bert's question right away, the bulk of the people, the working class and the poor, having rye bread every day, their festive bread would be the fine wheat bread. End of the answer of this question. Mind, this is the first half of the 19th century. So festive bread for the most of the people in Europe would be white bread, wheaten bread.
So something you don't have every day, something that you see some of the better off people having, that would be something you would aspire to and would enjoy having.
Exactly, and we have testimonies of that in literature and also in paintings, but also in social inquiries, when people are asked, working class people and poor people are asked, what do you have? Which sort of bread would you have? They would answer, well, it's very plain, it's very common, it's rye or muslin bread, that's it. But on some occasions, and we will talk about this, which occasions, they would have white bread. And that was really something special because the image of this white bread was the bread of the rich. So when you eat the bread of the rich, you feel for a very short moment rich also. And that would be a very festive occasion and a very rare occasion. Okay. And I will come back to that later when dealing about the occasions that people would have fancy bread sorts.
So what would the rich people do then? You know, they can't really upgrade to anything. They wouldn't eat what the other poorer people eat, would they?
Of course not. This is bread and food in general is very clear to demarcate your own social class vis-a-vis to another social class. You would use food and bread as a means of communication that you as a rich person would be able to eat the white bread on a daily basis, which was pretty expensive. But you would have, for instance, also special breads. And I have a great example in Paris or in France, which is a bread called brioche. Nowadays, we would have the brioche in France. It's a small little bread. But in the early 19th century and in the 18th century and the 17th century, brioche would be a bigger bread of 1.5 kilos, but very fine. And that's the difference with the normal white wheaten bread. There would be some particular stuffs that are added to that bread.
Okay.
The brioche would be, milk would be added, for instance. Okay, milk is not that expensive, you would argue, but it makes more a complex process of producing that type of bread, and therefore it was more expensive.
Just like with the zupfer here as well, you know, they use milk to prepare that for a special occasion. That's okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and the other word they would also add, for instance, some butter or sugar or honey. And this is not new, by the way. This is very ancient. This goes back a long time. So it makes a difference according to the type of bread and the price that you pay. And that would be fancy breads. And very rich people, I'm talking about rich aristocrats in the early 19th century, they would have brioche on a daily basis, which was extremely expensive, but they did mind, they could afford it. And so this is a very clear example of people, rich people who use fancy bread sorts to establish, to show their richness, their status.
And do we imagine that these people had the bread on its own because it was a special bread, or would the bread still be integrated in a larger kind of meal, or would it be on the side somewhere, or would it be shown in the middle? I mean, how would the sort of setting look, do you think?
Yeah, well, it depends on where you live. If you lived in the north of Europe or the south of the center of the east or the west, it makes a difference. But in most countries, when rich people were having this type of fancy breads, it would be at the petit déjeuner, at the breakfast or the first meal. I'm
Okay.
hesitating to use present day words for the past.
Yeah.
It would be the first meal of the day, and that would be in France, for instance, it would be at 11 in the morning. Whereas in Belgium, it would be at around 10. That is for rich people, of course. Huh? In other countries, it would be still at a different time. But that would be the first moment when people would have these fancy breads, and they would have enough of them. Later in the day, they would have more ordinary white breads, but still very expensive compared to other breads. And it depends, of course, if you would have bread with your meal or not. In the Southern Europe, people would have bread, rich people would have bread throughout the meal. In Belgium or in Britain, it would not be the case.
So shall we maybe then move to the occasions? You know, we talked about, you know, the time of the day when people might have bread, but what are the sort of typical occasions when you would shift your normal everyday routine and try to have something better or more distinctive?
Yeah, that's an easy and together a difficult question, because I need to come back to the 19th century and the big changes in the economy, in agriculture, in trade, etc. Europe has been invaded, like it was called by agricultural historians, by massive import of wheat of good baking quality at around the 1870s. It starts in my country, for instance, in Belgium, it starts precisely in the year 1873, because there was the lowering of the import taxes. Actually, they were abolished. So this wheat could come in freely. Also in Britain, by the way, less so in France or in Germany. But this means actually a revolution in terms of the consumption of bread, because the white bread that used to be exclusive for the rich people became much more cheaper.
Okay.
We have the figures. It's really a revolution. I'm going to make a comparison, and every comparison is difficult. Huh? But imagine if today the price of the energy, whether that would be oil or electricity, would diminish by about 50 to 60%.
Massive.
That's massive. It will change our way of thinking about the price of bread, etc. But this actually happened in the 1880s, 1890s, all over Europe. And this means that the white bread that previously was only consumed by the rich people now started to be consumed by the less rich people, by the working class people. And they did, by all means. So you have this phenomenon, very interesting phenomenon of a change of hierarchies among bread sources. The rich people see that the poorer people, the working class people, started to eat their bread, and I put that in inverted commas, because it's not my bread, obviously. So this is a very classical example of what happens. The rich people try to find other sorts of bread to make the difference.
Distinguish them,
distinguish them. Whereas the poor people not only consume the white bread, but also started to consume on special occasions. And this is an answer to your question, a first part of the answer to your question, Beat, because they not only start to consume white bread, wheaten bread, but on special occasions, like a Sunday or a feast, they would buy raisin bread or mill bread. And this is a real revolution, because previously it was unthinkable that poor people or working class people would buy raisin bread of wheat. They could never buy it, they could not afford it. And
so that's like a tangible benefit of globalization, you would say, that suddenly it's possible at least to have a bit more of the festive breads thanks to these imports which came in from overseas.
Yeah, you put it right away in a big global economy, but it's indeed the case. So this is one of the good consequences of globalization. Of course, later on, and this is nothing to do with festive bread, but still to make this parenthesis, later on, the white bread became was consumed by virtually all people, except people who were somewhat ill or were constipated, and they would have more coarse or whole meal bread.
Okay.
The difference. Now, going back to your question, the rich people see that the poor people start to have this white bread, and they are seeking for other types of bread, even much more sophisticated, much more refined than before. And it's very difficult for them to find these sorts of bread. So what they do is to have, on special occasions, to have much more refined bread, to have not only raisin bread, but raisin bread baked with milk, with more sugar, with more honey, with some spices, for instance. But actually, it was not a big success. So what happened was that the very old special occasions for people who were feasting were since long in Europe very traditional. It's the change of the year.
Okay.
Year to New Year. Festive occasion, and people would have, if you are rich, you would have very special things. If you are less rich, you would have enough food. Then there would be carnival. I think it's called Fat Tuesday in English.
Okay.
That in February, that is. Then in Catholic countries, you would have the communion, which is in March.
Yeah.
You would have Easter. And we will talk about this later because it's still nowadays very important. Then you would have something like midsummer.
Okay. So in every season, it's not like bread is something that you have more in the winter and you never have in the summer, because it's all year round. There are some special occasions.
Yeah, and then there was Christmas. So this is the year all round that there would be special occasions to have festive bread. But what is interesting is that the sort of bread differs from one season or from one feast to another. Just to give one example, in this country, in Flanders, you would have during the carnival feast, Fat Tuesday, you would have krakelingen. I think in English it's cracknels or something like that. It's a big bread of about 800 grams, and it's actually it resembles the one you're showing in the background, Beat. It's especially made for that occasion.
Okay.
And, nowadays it's much smaller, so it is become individualized. Nowadays.
And so some of these breads, people would walk into a room and they would immediately know what day it is, because you only get that kind of bread on these special occasions.
Yeah, and perhaps the best example of all these special breads is the Easter bread.
Okay.
Because Easter is always linked to eggs, right? Eggs as a symbol of the renewal of life, the eternal life, the rebirth, etc. And very often Easter breads, they have a very clear shape, recognizable shape in most of our countries, and these Catholic countries, and very often they're depicted or shown with eggs.
Okay.
And to make it very clear that this is a very particular bread, and this bread nowadays is produced in Belgium and also in France, in parts of the Netherlands and Germany, on this very special occasion, and not in the other periods of the year.
Okay. Well, is that a good moment maybe to show our viewers a little bit of what we're talking about, so as it were, whet their appetites a little bit?
Sure.
And I'm showing here a picture that you kindly selected for us. So does this illustrate some of the points you've been making?
Exactly. Yeah. So you see on below on the typical Easter bread that has been served since the 1930s. No, I rephrase this. That has been shown since the 1930s in cookery books till today. It's a very white bread, very light, with raisins, with milk, and it's pretty sweet because on top there is this baking powder. or this sugar that is very special for this part of the year.
And we see the eggs, yeah, that you mentioned, obviously the combination of, and immediately it's a sort of an Easter morning, you would walk in and, you know, you don't have to ask twice what feast of the year that is. And the bread plays a very important part in that.
Exactly, yeah.
Good, shall we? Yeah.
No, may I come back to another special occasion?
Yeah.
A very odd festive occasion, which we, I don't think we still know it today in most of our countries, but it was very popular until the 1950s, in Belgium at least. It's the custom of the dead bread.
Okay.
It still exists in Mexico, for instance, nowadays. I don't know the exact name, I don't know Spanish enough, but I know it still exists there today. And it was the very special occasion when a rich person has died, and there is this burial ceremony. People were rich people were expected to distribute bread.
Okay, to the poor.
People, yeah, but not only to the poor people. And so for
everyone.
Yeah, for rich people, you would not distribute rye bread because that is not good for your status as rich. So you would distribute better bread, and very often fine white bread was distributed, which was one of the rare occasions that poor people or working class people would have this white bread.
Okay.
So this is a very...
this reminds me of something that you see in England a lot, you know, in the alms giving, that people endowed bread charities for the poor. So on certain marked occasions, which would be special occasions for these poor people, parishes would hand out to them bread, literally bread. And for them, of course, this would be a massively festive occasion, even if the bread was perhaps not very special.
Yeah, yeah. And it was something that the rich people would do to show their richness, and also to earn their place in heaven, of course.
Exactly. So a charitable deed that would help for their salvation. Yes, you've also selected a second kind of picture for us. So this looks much more diversified.
Yes, and this is the first one was a picture that came out of a book of 1930s, and this is one of a book in 1957. It is by the way, this is a picture that comes out of a cookery book that my mother had when she married. So it's Belgian Dutch, this one. And you see a lot of different smaller breads. We don't talk about these, right? We talk only about the bigger breads. But already you see on top and on the left a great variety of fancy breads. Now, some of the breads, this is mentioned in the cookery book, are especially baked during special occasions, especially during Easter and Christmas. I could say which one, the one on, not the, you see the two small puppets on the left? There is this long baguette type bread, and that is ciabatta-like bread. And that's a big bread actually, and that's especially baked for Christmas. So it's explained. And also the bread in the middle of the page, you see this very white thing, and this is also baked especially for Christmas. And so
there's also different shapes, there's different decorations, there's different baking styles. All of this can make a bread special.
Yes, and all of these shapes and forms have special meaning. So it's explained in the book. And the long shape may refer to whatever influence, but the strings are very special and are symbolizing the eternal renewal of the nature. I guess most people nowadays don't know about this meaning anymore, but bread and symbolism is really, really important, even today.
Okay. Good, so maybe I'll stop sharing the screen now so we can come to some sort of conclusion here. So just a minute while I get out of the shared screen. And then maybe to sort of finish off, we've talked about, you know, the early modern period, we talked about the 19th century with all the sort of diversification that we're seeing nowadays. Is there still a festive bread culture today? Or is it now all festive, you know, all mixed up, everything at the same time?
It is a difficult question, Beat. When you asked, when we prepared this, I was saying, well, how can I measure this? How could I know this? Because you're right, going to the supermarket, because most people buy bread nowadays in the supermarkets. Huh? Going to a supermarket, you see all sorts of bread, healthy bread and organic bread, name it. And also the old festive breads. Yet, there are still nowadays, and bakers, small bakers, they advertise with their special breads for special occasions, saying you can only buy this bread at this moment with me, not in supermarkets.
Okay.
So I have advertisements to show and to prove you the point that there is still festive bread. Then I went to look at household inquiries, household budget inquiries. And we have in Belgium every 2 years an inquiry. So the last one was 2020, which is no good because of the pandemic and very strange results. So I go back to 2018, which is pretty recent. And then I took a look at the expenditure of 4 income categories, quartiles, like economists say. So the lowest, the middle, the 2 middle, and the highest one. And then I found, and I take a look at my figures, there is a category called special breads, and I quote, double point, Christmas bread, Easter bread, bread with nuts, milk bread, Moroccan bread and Turkish bread, gluten-free bread, and others. And it is about the Christmas and the Easter bread that are named first, and not Moroccan bread or Turkish bread. So this is a very complex group. Nevertheless, taking a look at the 4 income categories and their expenditures to these 4 bread, to these special breads. Lowest income group, €9 per year per household. So just keep in mind the 9, the second 15, the third 20, and the highest income group 32.
Okay.
So it's 3.5 times higher than the lowest income group. I wonder why. What is this? And of course, these special breads in general are much more expensive. Because they contain raisins and all sorts of special almonds or nuts and whatever. So would that mean that rich people would enjoy more festive bread? Big question mark. So my answer would be yes, to a certain extent, but when would they have these breads? Would they consume these breads throughout the year, which means that they have more money to spend, or would they enjoy these breads at the very traditional old special occasions? You would need an anthropologist or a sociologist to answer this question, and not a social economic historian like me.
And that's a nice little way of saying that much further research, of course, needs to be done on this. And that we're looking forward to you continuing all the work that you've been doing on bread. And so really remains for me to say, you know, thank you very much for sharing your time and your research with us today. Greatly appreciated. And equally, many thanks to you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the feast events and initiatives we are running in conjunction with Coventry City of Culture, please visit our website at the address you can see in the video description. So goodbye, Peter. Thank you very much, and hope everybody enjoys a little festive bread as soon as they can.
Bye all. Bye, Beat.
Thank you very much.